Imagine spending like 2,000 hours repeating the exact same physical motion on your computer mouse.
Right. Just clicking a digital tree over and over.
Yeah, exactly. Clicking a tree, watching this tiny little animation loop, and waiting. And you do all of that just to make a single number go up by like one increment.
It sounds like actual torture to most people.
I mean, it really does. But in the world of massive multiplayer online games, that level of repetitive grind, well, it isn't considered a flaw at all. It's actually considered a badge of honor.
Oh, absolutely. It's the whole point for a lot of players.
Right, like you look up the universally agreed upon mathematically perfect strategy, what gamers call the meta, and you just execute it flawlessly until your eyes glaze over. But today, we're looking at a player who spent those same thousands of hours doing something entirely different.
Yeah, something completely counterintuitive.
Exactly. They spent it just quietly observing.
And it is a remarkable departure from how we usually interact with these digital spaces. So the source material for our deep dive today is this set of highly detailed, honestly incredibly philosophical notes written by a player of the classic online game Runescape.
A game that is famously punishing.
Very much so. It's
Yeah.
culturally famous for its years-long grind. But this player, operating under the persona of Tira, or the Seeker, well, they actively refuse to optimize. They play the game entirely as a study of meaning.
And what we want to do for you today, listening to this, is explore how radically this philosophy alters the landscape of a game. Like, we want to look at what happens when you shift your core metric from progress per hour to meaning per hour.
Which is a huge shift.
Massive, because it doesn't just change the mechanics of a video game, it completely rewrites the experience of the entire world.
Exactly. And to really understand the gravity of Tyra's approach, you have to understand the environment they're rebelling against, right? RuneScape is built on an economy of scale. Players naturally gravitate toward the fastest ways to accumulate wealth and experience points. So to enter that high-pressure ecosystem and intentionally hit the brakes, it's just a fascinating psychological experiment.
Okay, let's unpack this by looking at how Tira establishes their identity before they ever swing a sword or cast a spell. So in RuneScape, every single player starts on Tutorial Island.
Right, the classic starting zone.
Yeah, and it is exactly what it sounds like. It's this enclosed space that forces you to learn how to light a fire, bake a loaf of bread, equip a dagger, stuff like that.
The standard behavior is to just speedrun this island in, like, 10 minutes.
Yeah, just to get to the mainland where the real game starts. But Tira's notes, they don't refer to it as a tutorial at all. They call it threshold, or a quiet crossing.
And that framing sets the tone for literally everything that follows. I mean, before Tira even begins to interact with the broader world, they pause to ask, who am I in this space? Why am I drawn to the unseen?
Which is wild for an MMO.
It really is. They establish boundaries for themselves immediately. For example, they intentionally limit their early physical combat. They decide, I'm not going to rush leveling up my melee stats with swords or axes. To the Seeker, magic isn't a combat mechanic used to just quickly dispatch enemies. It's their voice.
Their voice. Wow.
Yeah, it's their primary method of communicating with the world around them.
I was so struck by that concept. Like, magic as a voice completely recontextualizes the game's fundamental actions. When a typical player is skilling, which is, the community term for repetitively training a non-combat ability, they're just watching a progress bar.
Staring at the screen, waiting for the level up.
Exactly. But Tira treats the act of casting a spell as learning a new word in a language. Take the skill of runecrafting, which involves manually creating the magical stones required to cast spells. Most players treat it as a chore to make a profit, but Tira views it as understanding the underlying grammar of reality.
And it extends to every interaction. Like, take the prayer skill. In standard gameplay, you train prayer by collecting thousands of animal bones and rapidly burying them.
Just clicking as fast as possible.
Right, or offering them at an altar strictly for the experience points. But Tira describes burying bones with intentional reverence. Even the thieving skill, which usually involves relentlessly pickpocketing digital townsfolk to amass early wealth, is framed so differently. Tira views thieving not as a chaotic cash grab, but as a quiet rebellion, a way of testing the boundaries of the established order.
It fundamentally changes how they navigate the early narratives of the game, too. There are hundreds of quests in RuneScape. The efficient strategy is to pull up a guide, find the quests that offer the biggest experience rewards, and literally hold down the spacebar to skip all the dialogue.
Nobody reads the dialogue.
Right. But Tira seeks out quests for narrative resonance. They highlight a quest called Rune Mysteries to uncover hidden knowledge. They do Priest in Peril because it's a crucial step toward this dark region called Morytania.
Oh, and the Restless Ghost.
Yes, the Restless Ghost. That one involves finding a skull for a spirit haunting a graveyard. Most players do it in 5 minutes for the quick reward. Tira does it to provide quiet closure to an unresolved soul.
What's fascinating here is how this gentle, narrative-driven approach fundamentally alters their early game economy. I mean, in a game with a massive player-driven stock market, everyone wants to know the meta method for making gold as fast as possible.
Obviously.
But Tira gathers their early money by simply noticing what other players overlook. They collect odd items left on the ground, or pick up things that spawn in forgotten corners of the map. They describe it as observing the ecosystem instead of exploiting it.
You know, it reminds me of the 2 different ways people travel in the real world.
Oh, how so?
Well, imagine you fly to a foreign country. The highly efficient, min-maxed way to travel is to pull up a checklist of the top 10 tourist monuments, sprint between them, snap a selfie at each one, and fly home.
The whole "if it's not on Instagram, I didn't go" mindset.
Right, you successfully completed the trip. But Tira's approach is like arriving in that same foreign country, completely ignoring the monuments and finding a quiet local cafe. You just sit down, you listen to the cadence of the language, you observe the daily routines of the locals. You might not see the Eiffel Tower, but you actually comprehend the ecosystem.
I love that analogy. And just like sitting in that cafe, Tira's approach doesn't require a grueling schedule.
Yeah.
The notes specify that they only play like 1 to 2 hours a day, maybe 8 to 12 hours a week.
Which is nothing in MNO terms.
Nothing. In a culture where hardcore players log 10-hour daily sessions, Tira compares their gameplay to journaling. It requires presence, not exhausting daily output.
So once that quiet, observant identity is firmly established, there is a natural psychological pivot. You have your voice, you have your boundaries, but now you need to find a physical space where that specific identity actually belongs.
Yes.
Which leads us to a massive redefinition of the game's timeline, really.
Yeah. Right. So in standard progression, a player reaches the mid-game in a matter of weeks by hitting a specific threshold of stats. But Tira ignores the stats entirely. To them, the mid-game is defined by access and geographical understanding, and the geographical anchor they choose for the Seeker is this region called Morytania.
Morytania is such a fascinating choice. For a bit of context for you listening, it is a dreary, dangerous, swampy region ruled by vampires. It's perpetually dark. The monsters are super aggressive.
Most players only go there when they are forced to by a specific quest.
Yeah, and they teleport out the second they're done. But Tira actively seeks it out. They write that, thematically, Morytania represents death, memory, and the misunderstood. They also spend time in places like the desert, or a later game city called Arceus, which is heavily themed around dark magic and the manipulation of souls.
They are drawn to places that are spiritually complex and a little uncomfortable. To Tira, the mid-game threshold isn't a spreadsheet of level 50 skills, it is a feeling. Yeah, it's the moment they can stand in the swamps of Morytania, wearing their dark mystic robes, casting spells comfortably, and feeling like they actually belong to the environment, rather than just nervously visiting it as a tourist. Their actual numerical stats at this point are remarkably modest, like combat 80 to 95, magic 75 to 85, but they're completely coherent with the persona.
Okay, I have to jump in here and play devil's advocate for a second.
Sure, go for it.
If you strip away the social market, if you ignore the highest tier achievements, and you spend your limited time lingering in a digital graveyard in Draenor Village just for the atmosphere, aren't you essentially playing a single-player walking simulator inside an MMO? Doesn't refusing to progress in a game built entirely around progression just become inherently frustrating?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it only looks frustrating if you assume the goal is to conquer the game.
Which everyone assumes.
Right. But Tira is practicing what we might call emotional geography. They aren't lingering in a graveyard because they're mathematically stuck. They're lingering because the space holds meaning. There's this minigame in Morytania called Shades of Morton, which involves repairing a dilapidated temple and burning the remains of afflicted villagers to put them to rest.
Yeah, standard players do it exactly once to fulfill a diary requirement and literally never return.
Exactly. But Tira views it as a continuous ritual honoring forgotten people. They don't want the world to feel like an unsettling, unfinished memory. By fully digesting the atmosphere, they avoid the hollow, burnout-inducing feeling of rushing past beautiful details just to increase a number.
That makes total sense, because if you rush past everything at top speed, the world just becomes a blur of textures. Okay, so we've established the identity, and we've found a geographical home. Now we have to look at sustainability. Like, how do you maintain this persona long-term without burning out? Here's where it gets really interesting, because I was looking at their notes on resource management in the late game stages, which takes them, what, 6 to 12 months to even reach?
Yeah, at least.
And it looks like they essentially boycott the centralized player market entirely. They use this concept called closed-loop progression. How exactly does that function mechanically?
Well, to understand the closed loop, you have to look at the alternative. In a typical late-game scenario, a player operates a lot like a day trader. They grind a highly profitable boss for raw cash, take that cash to the game's central stock market, the Grand Exchange, buy thousands of raw materials, and just stand at a bank booth for 10 hours, rapidly combining them for experience.
Which is so disconnected from the world itself.
Completely. Tira rejects this. Instead of day trading, they plant a modest garden where the compost feeds next year's seeds.
Oh, I like that. A self-sustaining ecosystem.
Precisely. They train runecrafting manually at scattered altars to make their own runes. They use those specific runes to cast magic in combat or quests. That magic unlocks deeper parts of Morytania or Arceus, which yields drops or items that naturally lead them back to crafting more runes with a renewed sense of purpose. Nothing is bought from a faceless marketplace just to speed up the timeline. Every action feeds directly into the next.
And they pair that with something they call environment-based training. They refuse to stand at the most efficient bank in the game. If they need to train their magic skill, they physically walk to Morytania or Arceus to cast the spells, because the literal environment matches the meaning of the skill.
It's pure role embodiment.
Yeah, it turns the mundane act of leveling up into actual role embodiment. And they are highly selective about their magical goals, right? They want to master the ancient magic spellbook, which represents power drawn through the past, and the Arceus spellbook, representing power through memory.
And this selective ambition brings up their approach to the ultimate milestone in RuneScape, reaching level 99 in a skill. The game's experience curve is notoriously steep.
It's exponential, right?
Yeah. Early levels take minutes, but reaching level 99 requires over 13 million experience points. It can take hundreds of hours per skill. For hardcore players, the entire purpose of the endgame is to max their account by getting level 99 in everything. But Tira's philosophy is that level 99s are chosen, not collected.
That is so poetic.
Isn't it? They actively ignore maximizing their physical combat skills, like strength, attack, or ranged.
Which is completely contrary to MMO culture. I mean, physical combat is the foundation of the game for like 90% of the player base.
It is, but brute physical force contradicts the identity of the Seeker. To Tira, the only 99s that are inevitable are magic and runecrafting. Because if magic is their voice fully formed, like finally achieving total fluency in a complex language, then runecrafting is understanding the grammar of reality. They do note that the prayer skill might hit 99 eventually, but quietly. Not as a targeted, hyper-optimized goal, but just as a natural byproduct of their long-term devotion.
Even their approach to the game's major boss fights is completely reframed. Like, in the late game, players usually farm bosses. Take the Barrows brothers. They're these 6 ancient, cursed warriors buried in Morytania. The meta strategy is to run a mathematically perfect route, kill them in 3 minutes, loot the chest, teleport out, and repeat it 50 times an hour until you get a valuable armor drop.
And that's a factory line.
Exactly. But Tira's notes say they revisit bosses like Barrows purely for the atmosphere. They describe fighting that boss as being like rereading a chapter of a book that still has something to say, treating a video game boss fight like a dog-eared novel you return to when you need perspective.
It's such a profound way to protect yourself from the burnout that plagues so many gamers. Tira maintains a very modest bankroll, by the way. We were talking about maybe 500,000 to 1 million gold in the mid-game, capping out around 1 to 3 million in the late game.
Which is literally pocket change in an economy where top players hoard billions to prepare for future updates.
Yes, but maintaining that quiet niche flow of resources proves that building a self-sustaining system isn't about rushing to the finish line. It's about learning how to continue.
Which naturally raises the ultimate question. How does a journey designed around continuation actually conclude? Like, if you aren't chasing the absolute maximum level and you aren't trying to accumulate billions of gold, what does the end game look like?
Well, according to the notes, the end state for Tira is highly capable, but deliberately incomplete. In RuneScape, The absolute maximum total level you can achieve across all skills is 2277. Tira's character settles somewhere around 1800 to 2100.
Oh, wow. So they just stop.
Yeah, I mean, they're combat level 105 to 115. It is strong, it has access to almost everything, but it explicitly leaves room on the table.
You see this perfectly reflected in their favorite items, too. If you ask a veteran player what their favorite item is, they'll name the best-in-slot weapon-like, the mathematically strongest, multi-billion gold sword in the game. But Tira's favorite items are deeply personal. They cherish the God Cape, which is an item you have to earn completely alone in a dangerous arena, serving as a symbol of commitment.
Right?
They hold on to their basic mystic robes, which they view as their true, unadorned form. And my absolute favorite detail is how they view the Barrow's armor.
Oh, they don't even want the complete powerful set, do they?
No, they intentionally keep incomplete fragments of the armor. To them, finding a piece of the armor is like recovering a lost story. An incomplete set is actually more valuable to the persona because it leaves a mystery intact.
That passivity even applies to the game's rarest cosmetic rewards. RuneScape has pets, these tiny creatures that follow you around, awarded entirely by random chance while doing specific activities. Players will spend months painfully repeating a task to hunt a specific pet.
It's obsessive.
Highly obsessive. But Tira states they would never hunt them. If a Rift Guardian, which is the rare pet associated with runecrafting, happened to appear while they were quietly making runes at an altar, they would view it as a quiet, unexpected gift. Found, never hunted.
So the true endgame for Tira isn't a server-wide announcement or a fireworks display for maxing out an account. The true endgame is logging in without an explicit reason. They aren't chasing a level milestone. They're logging in simply to maintain the garden they've built, to walk slowly through the swamps of Morytania, to craft a few runes, to just, continue their small, quiet rituals.
And this raises a really important question about how we view completion. Tira notes that the average player's endgame always asks the question, what is left to achieve? The player clears the board, looks around, and feels empty because there are no more tasks. But Tira's endgame asks a fundamentally different question.
What remains meaningful?
Exactly. What remains meaningful?
So what does this all mean for you listening to this right now? Because we aren't just talking about a 20-year-old medieval clicking simulator here. Think about how you navigate your own physical spaces. Think about your career trajectory, the books piling up on your nightstand, or the way you aggressively schedule your weekends. Are you living your life trying to answer what is left to achieve? Are you just trying to clear the checklist as fast as mathematically possible? Or are you, like Tira, looking for what remains meaningful?
The author of the notes concludes with a really poignant paradox. They state that the most complete version of this account, the truest expression of the seeker, is the one that never feels finished, but also never feels incomplete. It is a life lived rather than a task completed.
We spend so much of our time terrified of leaving things unfinished. We're conditioned to want 100% completion. We want the max stats in our careers, our diets, our hobbies. But I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over today, something that builds on Tira's journey. What if the ultimate sign of mastering a system, whether it's a massive digital world, your professional ambitions, or just your daily to-do list, isn't checking every single box? What if true mastery is finally having the wisdom to know exactly which boxes are okay to leave blank forever?